So hi, I'm Ghadeer.
And I'm Rahma.
And today we're going to go through the orientation chapter. So let's start with the basics. What is anatomy and what is physiology? Anatomy is related to body structure, while physiology is related to their function. So anatomy is body structure and the relation to each other, while physiology is the function. And how do they do that? So topics of anatomy. We have several divisions for anatomy. We have gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, which deals with large body structures that can be seen with the visible eyes. While microscopic anatomy, it deals with small structures that require a microscope. Developmental anatomy, it traces changes throughout life. Pathological anatomy, it traces changes that happens to structure that is due to diseases. So pathological is structural changes due to diseases. Focus on the vocabulary word diseases. Then finally, radiographic anatomy. Radiographic anatomy is basically study the internal structure that is visualized by X-ray, MRI, and other stuff. So now you know what is anatomy and topics of anatomy. So how do we study anatomy? Can any of you guys give me an example?
Someone's mentioned in front of us.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Okay, yeah, microscopic good.
Okay, anatomical terminology, observation, and there's palpitation and oscillation. Guys, you need to distinguish between palpitation and oscillation. So palpitation is feeling the organ with your hand, while oscillation is listening to the organ sound using a stethoscope. So let's go with the organism level. So what is the organization level, I mean? So the organization level means is how do we go from a chemical element to an organism. So we start with an atom. A group of atoms that come together, they form first a cell. And then when a group of cells come together, we have a tissue. So two or more tissue will give us an organ. Example, like a kidney, heart, and then a group of organs together, we have an organ system, like cardiovascular system, respiratory system, and so on. Then all of these systems together, we're gonna have an organism level. Moving on to complementarity of structure and function. This concept is really important. So I just give you a brief definition, and by examples, I hope you'll be able to understand that. So basically, it means that function reflects structure. So how does that happen? So why do we have different shapes for our teeth? Because each shape serves a different function. Another example is why do we have valves in our heart? It's basically to prevent backflow of blood. And finally, what is the function of bone? It's basically to protect and support us. So how are they going to do this function? It's by their structure. Their structure contains hard mineral deposit. So guys, these two slides, go to the next slide, basically talks about the systems in our body. I would like to emphasize on how important to memorize these two slides, because questions can come from these two slides. Like you're just gonna see them, oh, these are systems that, like it's obvious, common sense. However, you should memorize these images. Like for example, the urinary system, it consists of what? Memorize the figures and the lines under the figures. They're really important. So like a question can come is, in which system vitamin D is synthesized? Can any of you answer?
Integumentary.
Exactly, in the integumentary system. Go back. So if you see between the lines, it's written that synthesis of vitamin D. So it's really important to memorize the images and the figures they mean and the lines under them. Okay, so now I will talk about essential life function. So I'll give you a brief summary about the essential life functions that will help you understand it while reading it from your book. I believe it's a whole page in the book. So I'll give you a brief summary that will help you understand and go through it. So let's start with boundaries. In order to understand it, I'll give you an example. For example, our skin is considered a boundary because it protects us from pathogens. Another example of boundary, we have cell membrane. It protects the internal environment. And then movement. Movement is like muscle movement. We're moving right now. I'm moving right now. Another example is movement that occurs inside our body, like propulsion of substances. And then responsiveness. Responsiveness is when the nervous system is able to detect a stimuli and respond to it. So for example, this is a hot plate. Here, while I'm touching the hot plate, I detect a stimulus, which is like the hot plate, and removing my hand is me responding to this stimulus. Then moving on to digestion. Digestion is as simple as it is, it's breaking down food and absorbing nutrients. Then we have metabolism. Metabolism is all chemical reactions, catabolism, anabolism, production of ATP, and what you need to note down is that they are all hormonally regulated. They're hormonally regulated by endocrine system gland secretions. And then we have excretion. Excretion is removal of waste, like through the respiratory system, CO2, urinary system, urine. And then reproduction. Reproduction is basically cell division, repair, growth, and also creation of offspring. Then growth. Growth is when there is increase in the size. So basically, cell production exceeds the cell loss. So all of these are essential life functions that are really important to sustain life and homeostasis. Now I will talk about the survival needs. The 5 survival needs, which is the nutrients, oxygen, water, normal body temperature, and also appropriate atmospheric pressure. What you need to note down is that all of them should be in a specific or around the appropriate range in order for us to be able to survive. So I'll start with oxygen. I will combine for you oxygen and nutrients in an example so it's easier for you guys to understand. So basically chemical reactions in our body, what do is that they take the food and break it down in order to give us energy. So how do this happen? Through oxidative reaction. And this oxidative reaction requires oxygen. That's why oxygen plays a huge role in breaking down food through chemical reactions and giving us energy. The second example, which is water. Did you know that water makes up 50 to 60% of body weight? And then we have normal body temperature. Maintaining a normal body temperature is really important. When the body temperature increases, the reactions in our body pace will increase. And when the temperature decreases, the reaction in our body will slow down. And what you should know that both extremes, very high body temperature, very low body temperature, will result in death. And then appropriate atmospheric pressure. So what is atmospheric pressure? It's basically the force that air exerts on our body surface. So let's say you're going on a high mountain. So there, the atmospheric pressure is low and the air is thin. As a result, gas exchange won't be efficient. So appropriate atmospheric pressure plays a really important and crucial role for gas exchange. Next. Now I will talk about components of homeostasis. So it is really important to understand the components of homeostasis and the role of each one in order to understand all the coming examples. And I believe it's a huge part of this chapter. So let's start. Basically, a stimulus. What is a stimulus? Basically, it's the change in the variable. And who will detect this stimulus? The receptor detects the change in the variable. Okay. So, for example, let's say the stimulus is a hot plate, as I gave previously. The hot plate is the stimulus. Who's gonna detect this? Who's gonna detect this change in the variable? It's the receptor. Then, after detecting the stimulus, it will take it through the afferent pathway. It's really important to know that receptor take it through the afferent pathway. The one with an A, to the control center. It's okay. To the control center. So it sends the input to the control center. And then from control center to the effector. And the effector is the one that's gonna make the action. The action is done by who? The effector. So you need to distinguish between afferent and efferent. So afferent, it's from receptor to control center, and efferent is from control center to effector. So what I would also like to say is that, what is the control center role? Control center, it compares the stimulus to the set point. So how does it know if this is normal or abnormal? It compares it to the set point. I'll show you like what do I mean by this in the examples.
I just want to add a mnemonic to you guys. I think it's mentioned in the book. Afferent, approaching, efferent, exit. So this is how.
Okay, so let's start with the stimulus. Before starting with this example, you guys have 2 feedbacks in our body. We have positive feedback and negative feedback. To make it simple for you, positive feedback, it enhances, while negative feedback, it reverses. As simple as that. So basically, let's start with the negative feedback. Negative feedback, for example, as heat. So someone is running, they're feeling hot. So the stimulus here is heat. And then heat, the receptor will detect this stimulus. After that, through the afferent pathway, the one with the A, it will go to the control center. The control center will compare it to the set point. And then it will give the output through the efferent pathway to the effector. So the effector will start, we're going to start sweating. The one that does the action is the effector. So another example is, for example, when we're feeling cold. So here, what is the stimulus? Feeling cold. And then the receptor is going to be temperature sensitive, like our skin, also cells in the brain. And then through afferent pathway to control center. And then again through efferent, which is the one that will exit, the effector. The skeletal muscle, we're going to start shivering. So in the heat stimulus, we're going to sweat, and the cold stimulus, we're going to shiver. Then the positive feedback. Before giving this example, I would like to tell you how important it is to know the positive feedback mentioned in the book because I believe they're limited. So memorizing them, I believe, would help you a lot during the exam. So an example of positive feedback that I'll tell you guys about, which is blood clotting. So basically, positive feedback, it enhances. How does it do that? So let's say we have a stimulus, which is a cut, for example. A cut is in a stimulus. What will happen is that platelet will come to this location and they will release chemicals. So the positive feedback here is that they will keep calling more and more platelets and releasing more and more chemicals until a platelet plug is fully formed. After a platelet plug is fully formed, here the feedback cycle ends with a plug. And that's it for the positive feedback.
Okay. So, good evening everyone. I'm Rahma, as I mentioned. So, coming to the part that you'll most probably skip because it seems easy, and then most of the wrong questions you get will be from this part, speaking from experience. So we have the anatomical position. The anatomical position is basically how I'm standing. Feet slightly apart, the palms are facing, and basically this position. So any question in the exam where you're asked to relate between two structures in the body, the thumb and another finger, any structure in the body, we're asked to relate between them, you have to refer to the anatomical position. Okay? Now, as of these names, I highly recommend that you do memorize them by keeping, by repeating them, because they could ask you, for example, what's the relationship between, for example, the pelvic and the axillary. Now, that's an easy example, but they could ask about more of the hard terms that you have to memorize here. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you go back a bit? So we shouldn't only memorize the big names. We should also memorize the parts in each part.
What do you mean the parts?
Yeah,
Only the names in
subtopics.
bold. Only the names in bold. Abu Bakr told us, Dr. Abu Bakr.
Yeah, only the names in bold, right?
They told you only the names in bold?
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't. So they didn't tell you to memorize these, right?
No.
Only
Okay.
bold.
Then you have to memorize the names in bold as they said, and then relate it to each other.
Yeah.
So what's on top of each
Yes.
other, what's needed. Okay, that's good. Okay, I just explained about the anatomical position. The importance is basically so we can all have a reference point that the physicians will refer to. Next. Okay, the body planes. So basically, the transverse plane, I'm cutting horizontally, so I'm dividing the body into an superior part and an inferior part. The frontal, I'm cutting the body in this way, so I'm separating it into an anterior part and a posterior part. And the sagittal, I'm cutting into a right part and a left part. So just pay attention to the fact that a plane, the term plane is different from the term axis. So for example, this is the frontal axis, right? So it's separating the body into anterior and posterior. But what's the anterior-posterior axis? You guys know what's the difference? So if I tell you can you point out the anterior-posterior axis, not plane, not the frontal plane that divides the body into these two. What's the anterior-posterior axis? Does anyone know? Just point the axis. You have,
The median,
what do you
or
mean?
like the one at the middle of the body.
No. That's the plane that will cut the body into these two parts. But what is the axis of the anterior
Right to
posterior?
left. Right to left.
Y
no?
axis.
It's right to left.
Huh?
Y axis.
No.
It's not right to left.
So basically, when we cut the body into these two parts, the anterior posterior axis will be this way.
Right to left.
Okay? So it's like in the transverse way. You know what I mean? I'm not asking you right to left. I'm asking you like what's the axis? So y or x axis. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Okay.
No, can you repeat what you said?
So basically, here the frontal plane is dividing the body into an anterior part and a posterior part, right? So the frontal plane is in the y-axis, right? So what did they ask? Like, what's a question that's around the idea of what's the axis of the anterior posterior parts of the body? anterior-posterior axis. It will be like this, because we're separating the body into this part and this part. So the axis is this way, because they're moving around it, or within it. Do you get the point? Do you get it? So the frontal is what cuts these two parts. Okay? And the axis of these two parts is, they're moving. Let's imagine I have a body here and I'm splitting it into these two parts. You know what I mean? So the plane that's cutting these two is a frontal, which is y-axis. But the axis, the anterior-posterior axis that they're moving with is the x-axis.
Is it always the x-axis?
Yeah.
So would the sagittal be x as well? Because you're moving them like this.
Yes, yes, exactly.
X as well?
Exactly.
But then transverse as well.
And then
Huh?
Transverse as well.
Exactly. But what's cutting them into this? The transverse plane, the sagittal plane. Do you get it? Okay. It's really also important to be able to identify the organs, and because they, for example, could ask a question. That's, for example, we're cutting a transverse section. Okay. What are the body parts that you can see? So they could bring in the multiple choices: the anterior-posterior wall, for example, the spleen, the liver, and then they will bring something that's not in here, which is, for example, the urinary bladder. So you choose the urinary bladder, which you can't see. So you have to memorize this. You have to memorize when you cut a body part, for example, from here, or any part. What can you see and what can't you see? Okay?
I just have a question. Like, how do these type of questions come? Like, does he tell me we took a transverse section at Kaza and what are the organs that you can see? Yeah, and he asked me what are the organs.
Yes, what are the organs that you can see or can't see? So the multiple choice will be based
So
upon
I
that.
need to know like where every organ is located in.
Exactly. So if I cut from here, what can I see? For example, if you cut from here, what can you see? Can you see the anterior? It can be confusing because when you are cutting transversely, you're separating the body into superior and inferior.
Yeah.
So in the exam, if you're not visualizing it, you'd eliminate the anterior-posterior part, but you can see it.
You can see it.
You can see it. What can't you see? The pelvic organs, for example, the urinary bladder. So you need to don't only refer to these pictures, of course, memorize these, and also ask yourself, if I cut from here, what do I see? If I cut like this, what do I see? Keep quizzing yourself in different parts. So you expect everything that's in the exam basically. This is the type of question that could come regarding the planes. We cut from here, what's the, or it could be a direct question. Next. Okay, I just explained this, the clinical importance of them. Basically medical imaging, sectional images, importance for interpreting 2D sections and relating them to 3D structures. So basically relating organs to each other. Transverse section, also memorize these as well. These are really important. Transverse section at kidney level shows kidneys clearly. If you cut it from the kidney level, it will show you the kidney, but if you cut from here, for example, you can't see it. Frontal section, it will give you a different kidney view. So you will still see a kidney, it's just a different part of it. Mid-sagittal section may miss kidneys entirely. Okay. Next. So these are also really important. You could, the question that could come about this whole chapter could be just from this part. So superior and inferior, I'm assuming you guys know, superior up, inferior down. Anterior and posterior, anterior, posterior. Medial and lateral. Medial is closer to the midline. So referring to what? Referring to the anatomical position. The midline is in the middle. All the medial structures are closer to the midline. And the lateral structures are lateral to the midline. So for example, the nose and the ears. The nose is closer to the midline, so the nose is medial to what? The ears. The nose is also medial to the eyes. It's not inferior because the nose starts from here. Okay? The nose starts from here, so it's medial to the eyes. The eyes are lateral to the nose. So you have to quiz yourself in this way. What's to what? Yes.
Yeah, but if we were asked about, like, for example, the nose,
Okay.
and they were referring it to two things, like the eyes, not the eye. So we say it's intermediate, right? It's more accurate?
What do you mean?
Intermediate. Like
No.
when something is placed between two structures. Like for example, the sternum, it's intermediate to the ribs. But if they say rib, like they're referring it to one thing, we say then that it's medial. I think this is what I remember the doctor told us or something.
The intermediate question would be about like structures that are different. So they're not gonna ask you like the eyes is one thing. They're not considered two. So for example, here the intermediate between a more medial and a more lateral structure. So for example, this is more lateral, this is more medial, right? So the structures in between them are gonna be the intermediate parts. They usually ask about like, for example, the collarbone is intermediate between the breastbone and the shoulder. So this is the collarbone, this is the breastbone, this is the
So they
shoulder.
asked about like two different
See,
types of
yeah,
structures,
it's two different types of structures that you can easily identify.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lateral is away from the midline?
Huh?
Lateral.
Yes, this is the reference. This is the midline. Medial is anything that's closer. So they usually ask you about two things and to relate between them. So midline, what's closer to the midline? Okay, and what's away from the midline? Now proximal and distal. Proximal and distal is what's closer to the origin of the body. So the origin of the body is usually the trunk. This is the origin. So what's closer? So for example, I have here my elbow and my wrist. This is the trunk, right? This is my elbow, this is my wrist. What's closer to the origin? The elbow. So it's the elbow is proximal to the wrist. See how we're using two. We're not talking about like in the sentence that I said. I didn't mention anything about the trunk. I said the elbow is proximal to the wrist. So the two structures and a word between them. Elbow is proximal to the wrist. So it's closer to the origin than the wrist. Superficial and deep, for example, easiest example, the ribs and the lungs. So the ribs are superficial to the lungs and the lungs are deep to the ribs. So they're inside it. So for example, my epidermis, for example, is superficial to the subcutaneous. So it's, I think you can imagine it in a 3D way, and you're going to the inside of the body. You're referring to it. Do you guys have any doubt regarding this point? Okay. That's it. Next. Okay, body cavities. We have two main internal body cavities. The dorsal, which is at the back, and the ventral, which is more anterior. These actually are also two other words for anterior and posterior. Dorsal is for posterior and ventral is for anterior. Both are close to the outside and protect the internal organs. The dorsal body cavity is for the brain, the spinal cord. The ventral body cavity is for the abdominal organs. They differ in what? In the embryonic development. So when the embryo is forming, where did they come from exactly? They differ in that. The lining membranes and concept of two cavity sets equals useful for learning. So this is why it's important to study them. So here we have, as I mentioned, the dorsal body cavity, which contains the cranial cavity, which has the brain, and the vertebral cavity, which contains the spinal cord. And then we have here the dorsal body cavity is quite easy to remember, just two structures, but the abdominal pelvic, the ventral body cavity is what's divided into two parts. We have the thoracic cavity right here. So this is your line between the two divisions. This is the thoracic cavity, which contains the heart and the lungs. So all of these actually, they're called the mediastinum. And the mediastinum is divided into the lungs, heart, and the organs above the heart. Okay? So this whole thing is called the mediastinum, and the mediastinum is divided into the cavities of the lungs, cavities of the heart, and so on. Now we have the diaphragm separating the two. The abdominal cavity contains the abdominal organs, digestive tract, and so on. And you have the pelvic cavity containing the pelvic organs, which are urinary bladder, reproductive organs, and rectum. As you can see, the pelvic cavity and the abdominal cavity are quite close, and it's kind of, there's a line in here that you can see. It's more of it forms a pump because the pelvic cavities are more like to the front, So this is the reason that you see this structure around you. Next. Okay, this is basically what I just explained. You need to also memorize what's in the cavities, which is quite easy to remember. Serous membranes. So, do you guys know the concept of serous membranes, how they are formed? So basically, if you have
double layer.
yeah, so if you have, for example, like here in the example, if you have a balloon and you put your fist into it, it's going to form two layers. The layer that's closer to your palm, which is the organ, is the visceral layer, and the layer that's closer to the wall of the, so for example, the small intestine. The layer that's attached or closer to the small intestine is the visceral. The layer that's closer to the abdominal wall is the parietal layer. So, and they're named in relation to the organs. So, for example, the lungs, pleural cavity, I think. The heart is the pericardial serosa, and they're named basically just in relation to the. And the ones in the abdomen is called the peritoneum. I think it's the one that's really different from the others. Next. Okay, this is also really important. So you have to memorize all of this. There's no anything tricky behind it. Basically, just naming the regions: umbilical region, epigastric, hypogastric, left hypochondriac, left lateral, left inguinal, right hypochondriac, and so on. So how do you memorize this? Basically, just keep doing it. Take a board and keep like writing the structures all over again. And you have to also, because what could a question come about this? They will ask you, there is a pain, for example, there is a pain in this specific part. For example, the left hypochondriac. So what's the organ that's most likely affected? So what would it be?
The spleen.
Exactly, the spleen. The pubic area, there's, and by the way, they might give you like a long question where there's a case, so many symptoms that has nothing to do with the question, and it will stress you out at the beginning of reading the question, but then at the end you realize that they're only asking about, for example, what's in the pubic region. But they will give you a whole case scenario about this patient, the history of the patient, when was the patient admitted, the age, the gender, all of this stuff, and like symptoms that doesn't even have to do with the question. But you keep reading them, and you read them all over again, and you get confused. So just finish the question first, and focus on the last line. Because all of the above will not matter if the question wants the organ and the pubic. No history will matter, if that's what they're asking. Next. Other body cavities that's not mentioned in the diagram here, it's a small paragraph in the book. They're mostly unhead, some next to, some open to the exterior. For example, the oral and digestive cavities, they are open to the exterior of the body, unlike serosa. So the membrane that's lining the digestive organs, it's open to the body because there's an oral cavity. But their serous membranes are closed inside the body. Nasal cavity, orbital cavities, which are house the eyes, middle ear cavities, synovial cavities between the joints. So just memorize these. Yeah? Did anyone ask anything? Okay. So coming to this part, we actually made you guys like a list that basically summarizes all of this, and we added pictures for you. So it would be like when you study the chapter from the book, you basically just skip the homeostatic imbalances because you already have it, like not skip it as in don't study it, skip it as in you already have it here in the notes. And I highly.
So this is important, the homeostatic imbalance?
Yeah,
It's really important. It's really important. I'm not sure how the percentage of the questions will come from these, but for example, in Bio 2, we would have like half of the exam from these basic.
Bio 1, I don't recognize.
And it's not hard. It's
Bio 1, I don't recognize that much questions from homeostatic imbalances, while Bio 2 was mostly about homeostatic imbalances.
But you never know what the
Yes.
system they set up for you, so it's really, really important.
It's important to relate it to the concept. That's certain.
So I highly also recommend that you do this, even like in other chapters that we're not explaining, where you don't have these notes. Make it for yourself. So when you study the chapter again from the book, you basically just skip. So because you will find some chapters that has plenty of these. So you basically just skip because you already prepared it for yourself on a side. So you can see in the pictures that I gave you, it pretty much sums up the, luckily for you guys, it only has like one or a few diseases here. For example, the hernia in the stomach, as you can see, there is a bit of a dilation above the diaphragm that the stomach can develop. And here it's mentioned about the diseases related to the lungs, the inflammation in the lungs, and another condition, effusion, where there could be fluid leaked to the lungs. Don't get much into details into these diseases, just know the definition because you will study them later in details, especially the ones about the lungs. So just know them. Don't get into much details for now. Okay, now individual questions we have for you guys. So
Do you answer?
yeah, just raise your hand.
Okay, never mind.
It's actually which is front of you?
Front and front are the same thing.
No. It is? Okay.
We go to the next question.
Yeah. So these are the type of questions that you should focus on. Two organs and the relationship to one another. Basically the most important focus. Few questions. Okay. Go. Are you sure?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, next. Okay.
صراحة اللي هو ملك بس أبو بكر قال لما يكون واحد فوق الراس بس حيصير مشكلة.
Is that hard?
لا بالضبط. هو بس واحد ما حيسوي عن اثنين نفس الوقت ما حيسوي. هو المفروض هو رجال هو.
Okay.
لا تحزن عليه بالله.
Okay. Next. في سؤال؟